I went abroad in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and it was on a program called Human Rights and Social Movements. So that was sort of the main focus of my independent study project, which I completed in the last 4 weeks of the program. So, as I said, it was conducted in Buenos Aires, and the methodology that I used was research, including reading books and articles, but also speaking with community members and doing some observations as well. My hypothesis that I started with was to figure out what their strategy was, and ultimately I decided that the strategy was insufficient. So I wanted to go over a couple terms so that we could perhaps better understand this presentation. One is marriage, which is historically run by the government, also usually connected to religion in some kind of way, and often only accessible by heterosexual couples. This is worldwide pretty much true. Civil union, also accessible by heterosexual couples, also administered by the government, but often doesn't have the religious connection that marriage does. Civil unions are sometimes an alternative for same-sex couples that are wanting some of the privileges and benefits of marriage, but sometimes it puts them in second-class citizenship compared to their peers that are heterosexual couples because they have access to one but not the other. So I'm going to ask for your guys' participation here. We're going to do a little quiz. Don't get nervous. It's Friday. We aren't in school, but we're going to do a little bit. Okay, so who knows? Are same-sex couples allowed to get civil unions in Argentina? You can just shout out. What do you think? Yes. They were actually the first country in Latin America and the Caribbean to allow same-sex couples to get married. And I was fortunate, and sorry, not to get married, to get a civil union, but I was fortunate enough to actually interview one of the men who was a part of this couple, and he was one of my informants, if you will, and I learned a lot from him. Are same-sex couples allowed to get married? Yes, in Buenos Aires. And it's kind of a tricky issue. I'll probably leave it at maybe, actually, and we'll go back to that. Okay. How about China? Same-sex civil unions? No. No. Marriage? No. Okay. Next. South Africa? Civil unions? Yes. Marriage? They're actually a very interesting case because generally the trajectory of a gay rights movement that seeks equality, they go for civil union first because it might be easier to get because it doesn't necessarily have the tight relationship to the church, which can be difficult to penetrate. And but because of their history with apartheid, the government was a little bit more sympathetic to human rights issues, and thus they're actually one of the few countries in the world that got same-sex marriage legal for same-sex couples compared to giving civil unions first. Spain? Yes. Civil unions? Yes. Also marriage. In this country, it was really important because in Argentina, a lot of the LGBT organizations used Spain as a model and even got some funding from Spain because their movement had been so successful. And that's important to how they sort of formed their strategy, was using Spain as an example. Okay, just a little bit of history so we can all be on the same page here. Stonewall was a gay bar in New York City, and 40 years ago, just in 2009, there was a police raid, which wasn't all too common in that time. Generally, the people were persecuted because they had alternative sexual orientations or alternative gender expression. So on this day, 40 years ago, in the summer, the people fought back for the first time. And this is what traditionally people use to mark the gay rights movement, which began in New York and then spread around the world. So they fought for 3 days, and last year it was a big deal for a lot of gay pride marches to mark this anniversary, because this is generally a space where people can feel free to express their sexual orientation or express their gender identity, whatever it may be. And this is one of the locations where I also did some observations for my project. One of the titles, or I guess what they focused on during the Gay Pride March, which was pretty much universal around the world, was a focus on marriage. Marriage, marriage, marriage. It's what they were fighting for. It's why they had everyone together. However, not all the groups were on the same page about this. It was generally the bigger organizations, the more well-known organizations that were pushing for marriage. So there's lots of different groups that I worked with and studied with in Buenos Aires. La Comunidad Homosexual de Argentina, La CHA, is one of the oldest in all of Latin America, and they have been pushing for civil unions the whole time. However, in comparison to INADI, which is a governmental organization, and La Fulana, they're sort of on the strand for same-sex marriage. So it's very interesting, because you have sort of one movement going together, but two strands. One fighting for civil unions for same-sex couples, and one fighting for marriage. And towards the end of my independent study project, they actually had, or what was supposed to be, the first marriage in all of Latin America. It was kind of interesting to be there in that moment, sort of a culmination of all the hard work that they had been doing at that time. I say sort of had one because after 3 hours of waiting at the civil registry, they were denied to get married because of some legal issue. It was pretty disappointing for all the people that were there, but eventually they did get married 3 weeks later. It's a difficult issue, though, because it's a law that was found to be discriminatory, one that excludes same-sex couples in the lower courts, but then it was a law that applied to the rest of the country. So I think we'll see more and more coming out, sort of difficulty in who has control about making this decision, which we also see in the United States. Lots of different states have their own policy. There's kind of a federal policy, but not really. This research that I did is also important for me at Macalester. I've been able to incorporate it into what will be my honors thesis, which will do a case study between Argentina and Spain. Because Argentina used Spain so much as an influence, I think it will be an interesting comparison to make, and maybe see why Spain was more successful, perhaps, than Argentina.